The parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled up to the Riverside Banquet Hall. I sat in my car for a moment, straightening the bouquet of white roses and yellow dahlias on the passenger seat, and then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. "Sweetheart," he said, and his voice had that careful, quiet quality it gets when he's about to deliver something he doesn't want to say. "Where are you right now?" "Outside the venue," I told him. "I'm a few minutes early. The front door looks locked. Are people still parking?" There was a pause long enough that I moved the phone away from my ear to check that the call hadn't dropped. "The party was last night," he said. The flowers sat on the seat beside me, still wrapped in tissue paper from the florist on Elm. I had driven 3 hours. I had requested Friday off from work 6 weeks in advance and found someone to cover my Saturday shift just in case. I had practiced what I was going to say in my toast the entire drive up, revising it out loud at every rest stop. "What do you mean last night?" I said. "We moved the dinner to Friday. We thought," he stopped. "We thought you knew, honey." Whitney said she had reached out to everyone. I looked through the windshield at the empty lot. The banquet hall's marquee sign still read, "Congratulations, Roy and Diane, 5 years." But the lights inside were off. A staff member was already unclipping a balloon arch from the entrance doors. "Dad," I said told me. He didn't speak for a moment. "Come to the house," he finally said. "Let me call your mother." My parents live 40 minutes outside the city in a 2-story brick colonial they've owned since before I was born. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my mother was already at the door. She had that expression she gets when something has gone wrong, and she doesn't yet fully understand what it is. Not worried exactly, more like she's waiting for the world to correct itself. She hugged me before I could say a word. Inside, the house still smelled like the party. Someone had left a floral centerpiece on the dining room table, cream and gold, still beautiful. A stack of greeting cards sat on the sideboard. I noticed my handmade card was not among them, because it was still in my bag, because I had planned to place it in my mother's in person at the dinner I had never been told was the night before. "I don't understand," my mother said. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. "Whitney said she'd spoken to you weeks ago. She said you were going to try to make it, but that you were having trouble getting coverage at the hospital." That detail landed differently than the others. Not just that I hadn't been told, but that a version of my attendance had already been built and distributed. A version where I knew about the date change, where I had tried to make arrangements, where my absence was understandable and expected. Someone had written me into the story before I ever had a chance to show up and play my actual part. "What exactly did she say?" I asked. My mother set down her mug. "She mentioned you'd been struggling to get someone to cover your shift, and that you were going to try but it wasn't looking good." She paused. "I thought you were going to walk in late. I kept watching the door until dessert." "I'm a nurse," I said. "I approved the time off 6 weeks ago. I had the entire weekend free." My mother looked at me, and I watched the moment she stopped trying to find a way for both versions to be true. I drove to Whitney's apartment that afternoon. She lives 20 minutes from my parents in a complex with a gated entrance and a fountain in the courtyard that I used to think was charming. She answered the door before I finished knocking. "I figured you'd come," she said. "Not I'm sorry you missed it. Not I have no idea what happened. Just I figured you'd come." Like my arrival at an empty banquet hall with a bouquet and a practice speech was a minor complication she had anticipated and was prepared to manage. She let me in. Her apartment was immaculate in the way it always is, organized, deliberate, a place for everything. She had taken home one of the table arrangements from the party. It sat on her kitchen counter like a small trophy. "The date changed," she said. "Mom and Dad wanted to move it up because Dad had a golf commitment Saturday morning and didn't want to be exhausted." "When did they decide that?" "About 3 weeks ago." "And you were going to let me know?" She picked up her phone and began scrolling, and for a moment I thought she was going to show me a text she had sent that I had somehow missed. Then she looked up and said, "I assumed someone mentioned it to you." "Who?" "Uncle Roy, maybe. Or Tatum." "I called Uncle Roy on the way here," I said. "He told me you told him I had a work emergency." Whitney's expression shifted, just slightly, but I had spent 31 years learning how to read her face. "I might have mentioned something about your schedule," she said. "You told him I had an emergency. That's specific." She didn't answer. I called Tatum too, I said. She said you told her I was planning to come Sunday morning instead. I might have said that. And Mom says you told her I knew about the new date and was running late because of traffic. I kept my voice even. Which one of those is actually true, Whitney? She sat down at the kitchen counter and looked at the centerpiece for a long moment. I didn't add you to the planning group, she said finally. When the date changed, I made a new group chat to coordinate the updated details. I didn't add you to it. Did you forget? Silence. Whitney. I thought it would be simpler, she said. When you're there, everyone watches to see how I'm doing. They compare. They always have. You're the one who went to college out of state, the one with the career, the one who gives the toasts that make Mom cry. I just wanted one event where I got to be the person who pulled it off without being measured against you. I had not expected that. I sat with it for a moment. I understood the feeling she was describing in the way you can understand something, while still knowing it doesn't make what followed acceptable. So you left me out of our parents' 35th anniversary, I said, and then you told everyone a different reason so no one would ask questions. She nodded once, very slightly. I need to talk to Mom and Dad, I said. I wanted to hear it from you first. I picked up my bag and left. I didn't go back to my parents' house that night. I drove to the hotel I had booked for the weekend, one I hadn't canceled because I'd still been hoping everything had a simple explanation, and I sat on the edge of the bed and went through everything I had. I started with my phone. I checked every text, voicemail, and email from the 6 weeks before the party. Whitney's name appeared 3 times in my messages. The most recent was a 2-minute call 8 days before the event. I remembered it clearly. She had asked whether I was bringing anyone as my +1. I had said no. She had said okay, that was the entire conversation. There was no call where she told me the date had moved. I checked twice. I opened my email and searched for anything related to the anniversary. I found the original venue confirmation my mother had forwarded to me back in March, when the dinner was still scheduled for Saturday. Nothing after that. No update, no new confirmation. Nothing. Then I looked at the family group text, the one my parents had created when they first announced the anniversary dinner, with me, Whitney, Uncle Roy, Tatum, and my grandmother. I scrolled back 3 weeks and found what I was looking for, a thread where my father had written, "So glad we're all doing this Friday instead," followed by my mother's heart emoji, followed by Whitney. "It's going to be a perfect night." Then Tatum, "So excited to celebrate you two." Then Uncle Roy, counting down. I had not responded, because I had never seen that message. I scrolled up to see when it had come through. There was a gap. The conversation picked back up after 2 days of silence. I looked more closely at the participant list and noticed something. The read receipts showed 6 names. I counted the visible ones: Mom, Dad, Whitney, Uncle Roy, Tatum, Grandma. That was 6. But I wasn't one of them. I scrolled back further and found the exact point where the composition of the group had changed. 3 weeks and 2 days before the party, Whitney had added her husband, who had been on the guest list, to the thread. On the same day, without any visible action logged in the chat, my name had disappeared from the participant count. He had been added, I had been removed. I called Tatum the next morning. She answered quickly, which told me she had already heard I'd come in the night before. "Whitney texted me this morning," she said carefully. "She said you were upset." "I missed my parents' anniversary," I said. "Can you tell me what she told you about why I wasn't going to be there?" A pause. "She said you were coming Sunday morning instead of Friday, that you had arranged to arrive the next day." "She told Uncle Roy I had a work emergency," I said. "She told my parents I was running late in traffic." Those are 3 different explanations. Tatum was quiet for a moment. "She called me about 3 weeks ago," she said slowly. "She mentioned you were having trouble coordinating your schedule. She made it sound like you were trying to figure out how to get there at all." "I had the full weekend approved," I said. "I've had it on my calendar since April." "She didn't tell me that." "No," I said. "She told each of you something different, something believable enough that nobody called me to check." Tatum didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I should have texted you. I kept thinking I'd see you when you got there, and then when you didn't show up, I figured you hadn't been able to make it work." "That's exactly what she counted on," I said. "Not that any of you were careless. Just that each explanation made enough sense on its own that none of you had reason to question it." My parents came to the hotel for brunch the next morning instead of me going to them. My mother brought orange juice in a mason jar from their fridge, because she knows I don't like the kind they serve at hotel restaurants, and that small ordinary gesture nearly undid me. I had organized everything the night before into a folder. I laid the pages out on the table one at a time. The call log from my phone, showing my last conversation with Whitney, 2 minutes, about a +1. The original venue confirmation my mother had forwarded me in March, no follow-up, no updated date. A screenshot of the family group text, showing the message thread from 3 weeks before the party, and the participant count that didn't include me. And finally, a screenshot of the moment in the group chat where Whitney's husband had been added, the same day the active participant count had shifted from 7 to 6. My father picked up each page and studied it. My mother read over his shoulder. "I sent the new confirmation to Whitney," my mother said quietly. "I asked her to pass it along to everyone." "She passed it to everyone except me," I said. And when it became clear I wasn't responding to the group thread instead of calling me, "She told each of you a different reason why I wasn't coming." My father set the pages down. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "She told me you had a work emergency," he said, not angrily, almost like he was cataloging it. "She told Tatum I was arriving Sunday. She told you both I was stuck in traffic." I paused. "She told me when I asked her directly that she left me out because she felt compared to me at family events and wanted this one for herself." My mother's hands went still on the table. My father looked at me for a long moment. "We should have called you ourselves," he said. "The moment the date changed, we should have called each of our kids directly. We handed that off and assumed it was handled, and we were wrong to do that." "I trusted that Whitney had spoken to you," my mother said. "I should have picked up the phone." That was the part that kept coming back to me. Not just what Whitney had done, but how smoothly it had worked. A family full of people who loved me had gone an entire evening without questioning her explanations. Not because they didn't care, but because each story had been calibrated carefully enough for the person receiving it. Together, the stories were impossible. Separately, each one had seemed like a reasonable misfortune. The family dinner took place 2 weeks later at my parents' house. My father had called everyone and asked them to come. He hadn't said much about why. After we finished eating, I laid the folder on the table. "I want to share something," I said, "not to put anyone on trial, but because I think everyone deserves to know what actually happened, from the same source, at the same time." I passed the pages around. The screenshots moved from hand to hand. Uncle Roy studied the group text participant list for a long time without speaking. Tatum set down her fork when she reached the call log. My grandmother picked up the venue confirmation and read it twice. "She told me you had an emergency," Uncle Roy said. He wasn't raising his voice. He sounded like a man putting together a puzzle that had been frustrating him without his knowing it. "She told me something else," Tatum said. She looked at Whitney across the table. "Why did you tell everyone something different?" Whitney sat very still. Her husband had his hand on the table near hers but wasn't touching it. "I didn't think anyone would compare notes," she said. "That's not an answer," Tatum said. "I know." Whitney looked down. "I know it's not." She looked up at me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't expect that to fix it. I'm sorry." I had spent 2 weeks deciding how I wanted to respond to that moment when it came. I had gone back and forth between saying a lot and saying very little. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "But I need you to understand what you actually did. You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision, and then you made 7 more decisions to cover it up, and every one of those decisions required you to look at someone who trusted you and tell them something that wasn't true." She nodded slowly. "I know," she said. "I do know that." I looked around the table before I said the next part. "I want to say something to everyone here, because this isn't only about Whitney." I paused. "I'm not angry that no one called me. I understand why. Each of you heard something that made sense, from someone you trusted, and you had no reason to question it." I folded my hands on the table. "But I think we've all been letting one person speak for other people for a long time, and nobody noticed it was happening until it hurt someone. I'd like us to change that." Uncle Roy cleared his throat. "I should have called you," he said. "I knew you were planning to come. I had no reason not to check in." "Same," said Tatum. "I'm sorry." My grandmother, who had not spoken since sitting down, looked at Whitney and said simply, "You know better than this." Whitney nodded, her eyes were wet. I do, she said. I think I've known that for a while and kept finding ways not to look at it. The dinner that followed was quieter than usual, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet that comes after something has been set down that people had been carrying without realizing it. My parents' anniversary falls in July. The following June, on a Tuesday afternoon, my mother called me. We're thinking small this year, she said. Just immediate family, maybe a few close friends. Dinner at Hartwell's on Saturday the 14th. I wanted to check your schedule before we committed to anything. I pulled up my calendar. That Saturday was open. That works perfectly, I said. Good, she paused. I'll send you the details myself, and I want you to know the date before I confirm it with the restaurant. 3 days later, a text came from my father with the restaurant name, address, and reservation time, followed by, your mother and I would really love for you to be there. Let us know if anything comes up. Uncle Roy called on a Thursday evening to ask if I wanted to carpool from the airport. Tatum sent me a voice message the week before asking if I was going to give a toast, and if so, could she sit next to me because she wanted to hear it. On the morning of the dinner, I stopped at the same florist on Elm, where I had bought the flowers the year before. The woman behind the counter recognized me. Anniversary flowers again, she asked. 36 years, I said. Same arrangement? Same arrangement. When I pulled into the parking lot at Hartwell's, my father was standing outside near the entrance. He saw me from across the lot and walked over. He didn't say much, he just took the bouquet out of my hands to carry it himself, the way he used to carry my backpack when I was small. The table was full when we walked in. My mother stood up and came around to hug me before I reached my seat. Tatum waved from the far end. Uncle Roy was already mid-story, making my grandmother laugh loud enough that the table beside us turned to look. Whitney was already there. She had come early. When I reached my seat, I found that she had moved her bag off the chair next to her. She didn't make a speech about it. She just looked up and nodded once, and I nodded back. The dinner was warm and loud in the easy way that family dinners are supposed to be. When my father stood to give his toast, he looked around the table slowly before he spoke. He thanked my mother for 36 years. He thanked everyone for coming. Then his eyes landed on me, just for a moment. I'm glad everyone's here, he said. Then he sat down and looked at me. Your turn. I stood up and gave the toast I had been saving for a year. I said what I had wanted to say about watching my parents build something steady and real over 36 years, and what that had taught me about what it means to actually show up for the people you love. Not just to appear, but to make sure they know they're wanted. When I sat down, my mother reached across and squeezed my hand. We stayed 2 hours past when the restaurant stopped seating. The waiter kept refilling the bread basket. Nobody was watching the clock. Walking out to the parking lot, my mother tucked her arm through mine and said, Next year, I'm calling you first thing. You called me first this year, I said. I know, she smiled, and look. She gestured back at the restaurant door, where my father was holding it open for Uncle Roy, where Tatum and Whitney were laughing about something on the sidewalk, where my grandmother was accepting my father's arm on the steps. I looked. The flowers were already inside, in a vase the restaurant had found, sitting in the center of a table that everyone had known they were invited to. That was all I had ever wanted.